All right, welcome back. Right now, we have another presentation ahead of us. Martin Beránek will share about their journey, their way to domain-driven design. So please welcome Martin on the stage.
Come on. Thank you everyone for coming. Super cool to be here. So as the introduction says, my name is Martin. I'm infrastructure lead. I'm something called jack of all trades, master of none. I used to be DevOps engineer, sysadmin, whatever those people are called these days. And quite recently we were platform team, but now we are infrastructure team. So I'm infrastructure lead. So in infrastructure, you kind of have to know a bit about everything. So that's why I thought it going to be fine to create a presentation about domain-driven design. And that's why I'm here. I'm beer enthusiast. It's lovely to be here, beer. I won't really blame you if you want to go for beer or food. I'm here for food as well. No blaming. I'm participating in operations. I do what's now called SRE. So we can also talk about it after the presentation as well. So with that, I would like to start with a bold statement. If you can't build a well-structured monolith, what makes you think microservices is the answer? That's a sentence from Simon Brown. It's a presentation he gave. And I think it's kind of, explaining the whole situation after like 6-7 years of introduction of microservices. Nobody really knows what's that, how it works. A lot of people do a lot of mistakes about it. And at the end, a lot of people notice that it's not really that important. For us, mainly in Shipmonk, through King is the value stream. And on the right side, you can see all the value streams we have. I'm familiar with like 2 of those. There's like 2 people from Shipmonk, so they can beat me up later, but I haven't got that much time to get familiar with all of those, but it's quite a lot of them. And for me and for our company, it's kind of interesting or important to understand where you are, like team-wise. What are you responsible for? Are you supporting the value stream? Are you generating the value? What is your context? Like what should you be responsible for? Who should you talk to if you have some kind of issue and problems? So that's something for which we cannot try to find the answers in domain-driven design. That's a book by Eric Evans. I think Dominic already showed it before. Just to repeat the title and everything. It's kind of long, but it's all right. And we kind of felt like, what if knowledge of each domain helps map relationships to the value stream? It's kind of nice because if you are participating in some kind of domain, you are programming something, you are always able to find out what's the value for the customer, what's the revenue impact, and so on. What if knowledge of my context helps with knowing my place in the company? That's also very interesting because we always have to remember that we are not doing the things for what and how, but we are mainly doing the things for why. So if you know why you're doing stuff, you maybe feel a bit more accomplished, not just by doing something. And after all, knowing like if each component of application has a clear and well-defined borders. If you are programming something and you have to know about the whole domain, in my case, or in Shipmonk case, shipping, it might be a bit frustrating. You have to always keep in touch with almost everything. So what if your domain, your component is directing up only to something you are interested in and you are developing? So those are the things and questions we kind of felt that might be answered by domain-driven design. There's a TLDR version. If you feel that reading a book from Eric Evans, I don't know if you heard or seen any of his presentations, they are long. And I'm not criticizing anyone, but I used to watch them before I go to sleep, and it worked. I fell asleep. But they are really interesting. So TLDR version from Abel Avram and Floyd Marinescu, I think that's 70 pages, and it basically covers all the important things. And today we'll be only talking about strategic patterns. So first of the pattern, what's domain? And I already said like a few words about domain, and we all kind of have a gist like what it should be, like what does it mean? And if I tell you that we do fulfillment, Does it ring a bell? What does it really mean? Shopify says that fulfillment refers to the process of preparing and delivering customers' orders. It's not a fulfillment I know from the school. It's fairly different. I think the Cambridge Dictionary says it much more better. A feeling of pleasure and satisfaction because you are happy with your life. And now go and ask people if they want to buy fulfillment, and maybe, just hire somebody and tell them, okay, so we are doing fulfillment, you can join us, and they'll be, oh, that's nice, you are doing saunas, beer, something. No, we are shipping stuff. No. I think like saying shipping is much more reasonable, but we are doing fulfillment, so that's our domain. And with that, I would like to continue with like another strategic pattern, which is called ubiquitous language. I think it's just a fancy word for local lingo, but named fancier. Yeah, fancier. And one of the example of that lingo is that huge box, in the real world, is a huge box. It's called Gaylord. And it's quite interesting story. You can ask Maciej, who is sitting there afterwards. He told me how does it work. So the Gaylord is actually a huge box which is filled with small boxes from the warehouse, and then the Gaylord is pushed through the like the shipping company, which is like DHL, all of them, and then deliver it to the customers, like to the people who are expecting the package. But Gaylord, that's interesting. I haven't known that before I joined Shipmonk. So that's ubiquitous language, something which names something in some smaller, much narrower context. Domain. I was like saying a few words about it already, and I found out, I found this nice sentence from Wikipedia. It's just like a definition from Circle. The subject area to which the user applies the program is the domain of the software. So, sounds weird, but if user is applying a Shipmonk app to the fulfillment, that's our domain. That's how simple it is. That's basically really like high overview, like from a helicopter. I don't know how would you name it. Usually, companies are dividing their code and all of the architecture around it into subdomains, and those subdomains usually have some categories. So in here, we have like 3 of those, generic, core, and supporting. Generic could be, well, generic domain. I put here like accounting and HR. That's something you can just bring from one company to the other, and it's always going to somehow work. The context and everything is almost always the same. Then we have core domain. That's the domain for generating value. For us, that's an order management system or warehouse management system, and it's obvious, for us the value is from delivering the packages, taking care of warehouse and all those things. So that's why it's warehouse management system, OMS, order management system, and shipping. And then we have supporting. Those subdomains usually do not generate the value. They do it, but closely connected to the core subdomains. So in here, like one of the examples from many could be warehouse management system optimization. And that's a thing done by data scientists, and all those smart people, which I really, admire because they can't be jack of all trades, master of none. They have to really understand their field in depth, because if they don't, the warehouse can get, entangled, slow down, and the revenue is, endangered and will not be efficient enough. So those are the subdomains. And how do you actually divide them, create something you can work with? And for that, as I was explaining, the ubiquitous language, domains, subdomains, for that you usually have something called bounded context. And division between bounded context, or the definition, is usually known once you start to estimate what's the ubiquitous language of the subdomain. So in here, the example is that, pass me that tote. And for me, it's like a matter of pronunciation, because for me, tote and tote are almost the same words. I'm sure that any native English speaker would be horrified by that, but all right. So tote is that box, and tote is that frog, tote, big frog. So that's important, and if those people are able to define in their language what is the boundary of their work, like what's the tote, they are able to say what's the context, what's the bounded context, and you can work with that. For me as an infrastructure guy, my context would end at the end of Kubernetes cluster, probably. But for the guy who is working in warehouse, he will be quite familiar with Toad, but he won't know anything about pod. Maybe he will, but it maybe will be the pod full of whales, because the pod is a pack of whales, also from Latin. And for me, the experts, the domain experts, which is kind of nice name for the people who understand what they are working with, those are the guys who can help you estimate the bounded context, because they are fully aware of their ubiquitous language. They can define it. They are very familiar with what they should know for their work, and they can quite literally tell you where you should start and begin. So hopefully you enjoy my 5 minutes Gimcraft. Yes, I'm Linux user. You can beat me up in the parking lot later. So that took me like 15 minutes of work. So thank you. Yeah. And if you have those bounded contexts, you can after all define the relationship in between those. And we already heard from Dominic's presentation something called big ball of mud. I think it's like in every presentation from Eric Evans. So it wasn't actually his thing to come up with. It wasn't really meant in a negative way previously. But at the end, it's just a way of working with models with unclear dependencies. As I was saying, if you have languages in the context which overlap, and you are not sure where to start or to begin, your integrity of the bounded context kind of collapse. And you can feel it in everyday programming. If you are like struggling to find out what's the model, how you should create some attributes, if they are going to be sufficient in the long run, or you are feeling that you will need to change it, in next sprint, you are maybe doing something wrong in integrity of the bounded context. And the threats are obvious. You are using agility to move forward. You are using independence in between the teams, and they always have to synchronize on things which kind of feel obvious for the domain experts, but they are kind of lost in the process of putting everything together as an application. And for creating, some diagrams and seeing what depends on what, you can use context maps. For that, I have, this is a Conway law, and I think Dominic read it better, but I'm going to try it myself as well. Like any organization that any organization that designs a system defined broadly will produce a design whose structure is a copy of the organization communication structure. It's important because this is our bounded context from like 2016, 17, I'm not sure. It was just a backend, that was it. And if you are interested in a context map and how does it translate to the architecture scheme of things, it was just one server running in DigitalOcean. It was hilarious. Whenever DigitalOcean had some kind of outage, we had it too. And I think I wrote like hundreds and hundreds messages to the support. We got quite a lot of credits back because if you fall down the SLA, they are guaranteeing. You can ask for some cash back. Of course, it was much less than we lost in the revenue we could have got instead of being down. But yeah, it was the beginning. It was just one backend, one broad context, big ball of mud. Now we have something like this. I left some kind of special relationship and functions in those way. So now we have like 4, let's say, bounded contexts. There are plenty more, but I felt like 4 little Shipmonks will do enough today. So in between warehouse management system and order management system, there is something called partnership. That means that these teams are actually sharing quite a lot of code base. They are not independent on each other, but it kind of works, especially if it maps your communication structure in the team and the people are willing to do that. For, let's say, warehouse management system optimization, those people are not usually creating any domain models. They are just conforming to the upstream, which is warehouse management system, and they are just accepting all the language on the ubiquitous language, all the models and so on, and working with them. It kind of makes sense, like for data engineers, they are not developing anything new. They are just trying to create some kind of big brain magic for us. There is quite a different story for account integration, and they are using something called anti-corruption layer. They actually have their own models, they are independent, and they need to do that for covering their bounded context. And to keep their world sane, they are using some proxies, middlewares, and so on. And at the end, you can call that anti-corruption layer, which kind of helps you not to bend your language too often if the upstream change. So broadly translated to the architecture and how does it actually look like in the cloud. So here you can see that a partnership pattern actually materialized into the shared database. Bad, especially for microservices, it's just no good. I purposely left word microservice quite a lot from this presentation. So it's not microservice word, except for ACCI, account integration, which actually has a separate database. And for that, we can say that there is some kind of limited database polyglotism. Each of those bounded contexts actually uses different database which serves better their purpose. So that's one of the advantage of having the separation. Well, there is no Saga patterns, no CQRS. I don't think that we are mature enough to get there. And I am not really sure that many companies are, but maybe one day. And the better part, something which I think is reasonable, is that services are somewhat bounded to their bounded context. Yeah, my dad is calling. Sorry. Well, hope he's not watching. Dad, stop. Okay. Anyway, so that's our architecture. And I kind of felt it would be interesting to focus on that one point of MySQL shared database, because that's something like anti-pattern in a microservices world. And even for that, we are trying to apply something which help us with the agility of the team. We kind of estimate that it would be much reasonable to have clear ownership of the service by a team, and that also materialize in the tables and the database itself. So each table is owned by the service. That transitionally means that each service is owned by the team, and that also means that all of this is managed by one bounded context, which can move separately, independently on their own. Instead of using API calls, we have DTO, which is like fancier, saying that we are communicating in between the services just by transferring database objects. And of course, as I was saying, it's a partnership pattern. We have almost same single code base for OMS, which is order management system, shipping, and warehouse management system. So instead of strangle pattern, which was explained by Dominic before, we are having only data ownership, which kind of helps. It's enough, and it kind of still serves the purpose of convey law. Okay, fair criticism, it's still one database, and there is a reason nobody reasonable is doing that in the large systems. So our database size is enormous, especially during the peak days, which is like Black Friday and so on. So we kind of have to deal with that, it's anti-pattern after all. But for us, we can always map it to the scale cube. That's something from a book from Michael T. Fisher and Martin Abbott. When they are trying to explain how to scale things. So we are strong in the functional part because we are still able to deploy the functions independently and scale with that. We are still able to clone horizontally and keep up with the demand to the API, but we are having trouble with data partition. So for that, we are still keeping the old known law that all of your reads should be 99% at least, and all of your create, update, and deletes should be in promises. So that kind of works for us. And if you design the application this way, you kind of have to, you can kind of omit whole microservices design in the first place. but it's kind of, it's not that easy to do. So why didn't we just migrate it to microservices, keep up with the flow, be updated, feel modern, famous, and everything? Again, if you can't build a well-structured monolith, what makes you think microservices is the answer? And for us, it applies twice as much because our teams are not in that way mature enough, or we haven't really felt the need to do it in this way. It's always easier to keep your monolith, face it, it's just a simple through. It's always simple to keep what you have and kind of work above it because it's always kind of, cheaper. It follows the business requirements, especially if I don't know if you ever tried to explain microservices to your like upper management and, to sell that idea. Okay, so tomorrow we are starting the huge rewrite. We are going to do microservices. And they are going to ask you, so what was there in the first place? Why didn't you have, why haven't you done it before, when you started? No, it's not like that. We are doing microservices. It's not really working like this. As I was showing, like for account integration, bounded context actually works. That's something like service because of the division, complexity of the language and the context which it works in. But for the system like order management system and warehouse management system, it's really no way to go. So what domain-driven design actually gave us? There are no monoliths, microservices, microkernels, monoservice, teroliths. There is just a value stream, and you are trying to map your application to value stream. There are use cases. You are trying to use correct tools to fulfill those use cases. So if you are doing that, your whole debate about microservices is just feeling old. Separation of concern helps with the agility, and sometimes it's enough. So if you are able to divide your database schema, say who is the owner of each table, who is owner of the data source, that's actually almost always enough to speed up the development. And from that, we can say that the bounded context is important, especially if you have multiple teams trying to work on the same thing. So for me, the biggest truth is that if you focus on boundaries, it actually helps you build faster. And we are trying to do that even in documentation. This is our Notion page. Each team has their own domain in there, and we are managing those domains separately. So it kind of helps us find all of the information relevant for development and everyday life. I think there's like an HR as well somewhere in there. So that's how much we take it seriously. I think it was like pretty fast. It was just a fast overview. Hopefully you enjoyed what I was saying. And it was more practical. I tried to say a few theoretical things which I always screw up, but hopefully it kind of help you in your future work. So yeah, I think I was pretty fast. So if you have any questions and everything, feel free to ask me. Hopefully I'll be able to answer. And thank you very much for listening. It works. Do you have any tips on how to collaboratively discover boundaries between bounded contexts, even storming session, something else? Yeah, I think a storming session is something I've read about in the book, and I mean it's kind of helpful, but be prepared that domain experts are usually not aware of like what should be the result. So you kind of always have to. I think for us, the most important part was being in the warehouses and explore how the warehouse actually works, understand the use cases, map them, describe them, and after that we are able to find out the ubiquitous language and how should we describe it in the application. So if you are able to be in touch, like with the customer, like with the client, or I don't know, domain experts, it's one of the best way to start to dealing with this. But I don't think there's like a general answer for that. It's just really tricky. even though you can design the system, prepare the architecture and everything, you can always end up with some non-functional requirement you haven't known before, for example, scaling, so it's hard. No clear answer for that. Okay, so now I click this. Okay. What value does understanding the context map to resource translation bring you? Okay. In which situation, for instance, do you refer to the diagram you showed? Yes, good question. Me personally, not that often. Hopefully, the project managers and technical project managers we have do that often. The people who are designing the features and trying to figure out what services should be touched, should work with that. But for me, the important part is that you have the overview and you can kind of know your place. What does context map to resource translation bring me? I think for me that means like the materialization of the bounded context in something I can touch. Well, I can work with, because I've heard multiple times that you can like have a bounded context and fulfill it with microservices, and it's almost the same thing. But in the end, like, what's the microservice? Is it a Lambda function? Is it some kind of database procedure? It's not really that clear. So for me, having that knowledge of, okay, this is one bounded context, and it's actually mapped directly to the resources I'm used to, Kubernetes pods, Lambda functions, and so on. That's something which I found interesting. Good question. How many bounded contexts do you have? Depends. I don't know. A lot. Again, it depends on the ubiquitous language and how many languages do you need to work with your domain. So I would say there is clear distinction in between like orders which are coming from the customers, warehouse, which is warehouse for keeping up and storing the stuff, shipping, that's also something which creates broader bounded context. R&D, like our research and development, has something more. So I'm not sure. I think a lot of them, and it depends on the languages you have to work with. How did you implement in domain events? I'm infrastructure guy. I think we can discuss this later if Vojta is in the room. This is going to be ghost hunting, right? If Vojta is in the room, we can talk about this later. Yeah, thanks. Okay. Yeah. Not sure. But I think the answer might surprise you. Okay. Hopefully, yeah, okay. Now I click on a different button. Oh, all right. If you have a big monolith database, do you deal somehow with archiving of all data, or you don't care? We care because AWS billing and because of some legal requirements and so on. It's a pain. Yeah, we are obliged to back up data for a given period of time, especially in European Union. So it is quite costly. It's not really easy to divide the backups in something simpler and easier and smaller. So it's a huge pain in the butt. It's costly. It's always hard to remove the backups, especially if there is no context and somebody forgot to give a good commentary. That's something which can drag on for like months, and you're still paying for that backup. So that sucks. Thanks for the question. No, this one. Okay. How do you share bounded context inside organization? Well, I think like by the description of design, like if you are aware like where one team ends and the other begins, depends. I was showing that even the documentation is divided into the domains. So if you are sure, like what about it context materials in which domain, that can also help. But I think it's something which should be, well, it's not like we are talking about bounded context at lunch. It's more like something given by the architecture and described by the project managers who are responsible for further development. So I think like the biggest point where you can find the information is in the documentation, which is in Notion. But I'm sure that the question was kind of aiming to something a bit different. So Anonymous, if you are in the room, you can ask me later. Okay, thank you very much. Those are the questions. If you have nothing else, don't hesitate to ask me about anything. I'll be around for like a few more minutes. I think my daughter's bedtime is like in an hour, so the time is limited. So thank you very much for being here and listening to me.